Nice here. Welcome back to another geology episode. One of the common questions that comes up early on when learning geology is, what are the differences between rocks and minerals? And it's common for students to use these terms incorrectly. In real life, this is a rock, this is a rock, this is a rock, this is not a rock, this is a rock, this is a mineral, rocks, a mineral and a rock. This is not a rock, but it has rocks, not a rock. This is a human, this is a rock, not mineral, made of rock. And all of this, too, is rock. In Minecraft, we have many rocks, like basalt, sandstone, maybe lapis, depending on how you interpret it in the game. We have a few items or blocks that are minerals in the game. Yes, ice can be a mineral, it can also be a rock. The raw ores might be if they are considered one specific or a mineral, and I have obsidian and coal in here, technically mineraloids, and also maybe rocks. It's things like this that are confusing, and we will get back to these later in the video. There are also two other terms I'd like to cover. One is crystals, of which we have 2 in the game, and gems, which we also have another 2. The distinction between these things can be a bit subjective and can change based on what you're actually talking about. What I can say now is that everything here is made of minerals, or a few of them mineraloids. The term rock is used in common speech almost interchangeably with the term stone, but there is a formal definition of rock used in geology. Any naturally occurring solid mass or aggregate of minerals or mineraloid matter. In short, it's made of minerals, so let's look at that definition. A mineral is a naturally occurring solid material with a well-defined chemical composition and an orderly internal structure. This is the complex one. The naturally occurring should have an asterisk at the end because there are some caveats to that part, but in general it means that it can't be formed by an organism. Whether that's by a human through some process like making concrete, or by an animal in nature like a clam's shell. It doesn't matter, neither are minerals. After we get some of the basics covered, we'll come back here and look at these definitions again to really talk about them, including what a mineraloid is. And we will revisit the real-life rocks from the opening. To talk about the well-defined chemical composition and an orderly internal structure, let's step into this little room. This is a block of Minecraft granite, a real-life rock. I have several examples on my front porch. This is a polished core sample of granite. It's composed of the minerals quartz, potassium feldspar, orthoclase feldspar, biotite, muscovite, and amphibole. In Minecraft, these pixel colors are representing those different minerals that make up the rock. Normally, one block is 1 meter, but let's shrink down and get a better look. This block is now 1 decimeter. We will focus on just one of these pixels, and we'll say that this one represents quartz. Quartz is a mineral with the formula SiO2, and it's the most common mineral on Earth's crust. Normally, quartz is not square, but I could cut a quartz crystal into a cube, and it would still be quartz. We can load in some grain sizes, so we have some things to compare as we continue shrinking down. There are a few different types of scales for sediment, but I am showing the numbers based on the phi scale. Here, each division is half the size of the previous one. And sediment is a geologic term for anything that is not in place. Something in place is part of a bigger rock, usually a rock formation, but once a rock breaks off and it can be moved by the elements, it is a piece of sediment. A boulder is anything greater than 256 millimeters, or just about a quarter of a Minecraft block. There is no upper limit, so this block would be a boulder in real life. The terms cobble, gravel, and sand actually refer to the size of the pieces and don't really mean anything about the composition of those pieces. They could be minerals, or they could just be smaller rocks. Clay is also the size of sediment, but it's both a sediment size and a family of minerals, and it will come up again later. Cobblestone is between 256 and 64 millimeters, so the Minecraft cobblestone is actually correct. The pieces that make up this texture are within that range. Gravel has a wide range, going from very coarse at 64 millimeters all the way down to very fine at 2 millimeters. If each pixel of gravel represents one piece of gravel, then they are 62.5 millimeters, and they just fit in the very coarse gravel description. Very coarse sand starts at 2 millimeters, but we don't have any smaller pixels on a block, so we just have to imagine that sand particles are smaller. And just to make some math easier, I'm going to increase this grain of quartz to 1 decimeter. And I'm also going to load in a few other things to talk about on the way down. We're going to load in the EM spectrum, or electromagnetic spectrum, and at our scale, we are just smaller than the smallest radio waves. And just below us are microwaves. There are many different things that are important when talking about a specific band of EM radiation, like the frequency or the amount of energy, but I'm only showing the wavelength, or the distance from one peak to the next. All right, let's keep shrinking. This block is now 1 centimeter, and we're going to pass into the infrared part of the EM spectrum. We'll talk about these guys when they're a little bit bigger. And we will cut our quartz into 1,000 pieces. And it's still a piece of quartz. But there will be a time when we cut our quartz and it is no longer quartz. Our piece here is 1 centimeter or 10 nanometers, which means it's a medium-sized piece of gravel. Let's keep going and get a better look at these things. One block is now 1 millimeter. This is a normal-sized grain of table salt, which is the mineral halite, NaCl. When you break it, it breaks into these little cubes, and it'll come up again later. The first TV I owned was an old cathode ray tube, or CRT, TV. It had a resolution of 640 by 480, and each pixel was almost 1 millimeter. And my current TV has pixels that are almost 1/3 that size. And my phone's pixels are about 0.05 millimeters, or 56 microns, which isn't even particularly small for pixels. And my phone doesn't actually use these bars, it uses this diamond configuration, but the size is still about the same. Let's cut up our quartz again. It's now just at the range between very coarse and coarse sand. Down one more level. Our block is now 0.1 millimeters. And cut up our quartz again. And it's the size of very fine sand. We have our next objects coming into view, and we are almost at the range of visible light. So let's keep going down. Our block is now 10 microns, and we are almost into the narrow band of EM radiation that is visible light. Only 750 to 400 nanometers. In the objects on each side of the EM spectrum is a rod and a cone cell from our eyes. They vary in size based on their location in the eye. The smaller sizes here are the diameters towards the center of our eye, where our visual resolution is the highest. We cut our quartz into 1,000 pieces again. It's still quartz, but now it's a piece of silt, and we are almost into the clay-sized particles. If you do any sort of visuals with scale, I think you're required by law to include a virus, so here's one coming up. Shrink down again. This block is now 1 micron, and in real life, any smaller than this, smaller than 400 nanometers, is the limit of seeing anything using light. This T2 virus is smaller than light, and so we will never be able to see it with an optical microscope. To observe things smaller than this, we could use something like a scanning electron microscope, which uses a beam of electrons instead of photons. I use an SEM at work, and here is a piece of medium sand up close. Just above it is a piece of silt, about 7 microns across, and this silt is made of clay minerals that are all flaky. This piece can fall apart, and these flakes will become clay-sized particles. This image would be impossible with an optical microscope. Each pixel in this image is about 9 nanometers, and this isn't even that zoomed in for what SEMs can do. Our quartz is now in the bottom range of clay particles. It's small enough that if you had some particles this size in your mouth, it would no longer feel gritty. Technically, we passed this last size. Anything less than 20 microns feels smooth in your mouth. This is a test that some soil geologists use to check the sediment size in the field. If they can put a small amount of sediment in their mouth and it's smooth, it's fine silt or clay. If it's gritty, then it's sandy or larger. This also means that light is smaller than this, so sadly, we can never taste the rainbow. Our block is now 0.1 microns, and we passed into the UV range of light, and X-rays are just visible down here. As we keep it in smaller, this quartz piece starts to more represent the idea of quartz. It's not going to have the same optical properties since we're smaller than visible light. At this scale, we would still have a cube of quartz with the same physical and chemical properties. Our cube is a sediment size called a colloid, and it's something we have all experienced before. Milk is particles of fat suspended in water. Milk goes through homogenization, which breaks up the fat particles into colloid-sized particles, and this prevents them from separating from the rest of the milk, which is basically water. The rest of the scale below clay is all just colloids. If you need to talk about a specific size, then you just use the phi number. much to say at this level. We passed into the range of X-rays, and our block is now 10 nanometers. Our quartz cube is a 17 Phi colloid, and the scale stops at 20, because if you have particles smaller than that, they're called molecules, or atoms. Our block is now 1 nanometer, and we have arrived at the atomic scale. Here is an atom of silicon in tan and a red oxygen atom. And this is a silica tetrahedron molecule, the building block of most silicate minerals, quartz containing nothing else but this. And here is the important distinction about minerals. A molecule has a formula, but a mineral is a formula and a physical arrangement. There are minerals that have the same chemical formula, like calcite and aragonite are both calcium carbonate, CaCO3, but they are not the same mineral because they have different atomic structures. The structure of a mineral is a repeatable, tileable structure. Here is the full structure of quartz, and this is where our cube of quartz fails. If we bring it down to our lattice of atoms, we cannot align this block in any scale or position and have that pattern of atoms inside it be tileable. If we look at the lattice from the top, you can see that there is a skew to this repeated pattern. You can see that things are aligned kind of on this angle here. To align our cube to the structure, we have to skew one of the angles. If we remove everything outside the box, we can see that each face of this is duplicated on the opposite side. So on this side, we have half an atom over here and half a silicon over here. Same thing with the top. We have these 2 quarters and these 2 quarters on the bottom. We could copy and paste this shape, front, back, top and bottom, up and down, and construct a quartz lattice of any size that we want. And this is what's called a unit cell. It is the smallest a mineral can get and still retain the physical, chemical, and symmetrical properties of a mineral. Every mineral has one. This shape is difficult to talk about in Minecraft, so let's look at a different mineral. This is halite, NaCl. It's an ionic compound, as all salts are. Its unit cell is a cube, which is perfect to talk about in Minecraft. So let's get out of this room and we'll talk a little bit about crystals. But before we do that, I want to drop down one more level. At this level, our block is 1 angstrom, or 0.01 nanometers, or 100 picometers. And I wanted to come down here just so we could see the shortest band of the EM radiation spectrum, gamma rays. Everything smaller than this, all the way down, is gamma rays. Okay, let's get back to normal size and get out of here. Let's recap minerals real quick. The structure of a mineral is a lattice of atoms in a repeating pattern with specific properties. The smallest unit that is still a specific mineral is contained by a unit cell. The shape of these unit cells dictate what shapes are possible for the macroscopic crystals, and there are only 7 shapes possible with these unit cells in 3D space. When repeated onto each other, they produce a lattice of a crystal system. We define these systems by the lengths of each axes, A, B, and C, and the angle between them, alpha, beta, and gamma. The simplest is cubic. Each axis is the same size, and all the angles between them are perpendicular. These unit cells just dictate the geometry and not actual size. NaCl is pretty simple, but if you look at any of the garnet group, the cell gets complex and quite large. I'll also show some minerals that belong to each crystal system. This one is galena. The second is tetragonal. It has one axis that is longer than the others, and the angles are still perpendicular. This is a weird mineral called apophyllite. If none of these axes are equal to each other, then it's orthorhombic. This is cavansite, the most brilliant blue mineral that I've ever seen. Monoclinic is the same as orthorhombic, except one of the angles is not perpendicular. This is a very clear piece of gypsum, and here is another one that I found in Montana that shows off its crystal system a little bit better. Triclinic is the most unhinged. None of the axes are equal to each other, and none of the angles are perpendicular. A very cool mineral, labradorite, and this one's actually from Labrador. Rhombohedral has each axes equal to each other, but none of the angles are 90. All of the faces in this system have the same size and shape too. Quartz belongs to this group. Hexagonal is a weird one too. One axis is not the same, and 2 angles are 90 degrees, but the third is 120. This unit cell is rotated 120 degrees for each translation, making this 6-sided shape. You can actually see the hexagonal shape of these vanadinite crystals. Crystals obviously come in more shapes than just these 7, so let's talk a little bit about crystals. A crystal is a solid material with an ordered internal structure, like a mineral, but it could also be man-made materials. This is a crystal of pure bismuth, but it's not found like this in nature, so that means it's not a mineral. The term crystal is often used by geologists when discussing the size or external shape of a mineral. A euhedral crystal is a crystal that shows its external form, usually because the crystal had enough space to grow without hitting something else or because it could push out other atoms that are in its way. The granite I showed earlier has a lot of quartz crystals, but you don't see them express their shape because all of the crystals are grown together with other minerals. This quartz cluster was able to grow freely, and you can see the external shape of the crystal. When talking about crystals, most people think about things like this. There is a whole field called crystallography that I am not anywhere close to an expert in. There are lots of terms like unit cell, crystal system, crystal structure, Bravais lattice, and crystal habit. All of them are linked together, but refer to specific things, which I'm not going to go into great detail here. But I will say that crystals exhibit some amount of symmetry, meaning that you can rotate or mirror the structure and it will be identical. Crystals grow out in layers, so if they can, they are usually symmetrical. You normally see quartz growing out with a spike, but that's because the crystal starts growing down at the bottom and it can't keep growing down. If it has room to grow on both sides, then quartz can grow like this with terminations on both ends. So let's get back to how crystals can come in so many shapes when they are only repeating one of those 7 crystal systems. We will look at just part of one of them, the isometric system. The isometric or cubic system is perfect for talking about things in Minecraft. Besides salt, some other common isometric minerals are pyrite and fluorite. We'll actually be seeing most of the shapes of a polyhedral die set. This is a 6-sided die. Here is an octahedron, an 8-sided die, and here is another crystal of fluorite, the same mineral but with a different shape. The expressed crystal shape is dependent on many variables like temperature, pressure, pH, and other environmental variations. This is one of my favorites, a rhombic dodecahedron. And my favorite group of minerals, garnets, commonly exhibit this form. They're so great. I just love how they grow like this naturally. This is a variety of a trapezohedron, specifically a deltoidal icosatetrahedron, and it's a common form of minerals in the zeolite family. This is another cool one, the pyritohedron. It's actually named after pyrite because it's a common form that that mineral takes. This is also a D12. This form can also be rotated, so you have what's called a negative form. Both of these forms can grow together at the same time, and you get a combination of the two. This is a type of twinning where you have 2 crystals growing together and sharing some of the crystal lattice points. Let's look at some other combinations of the isometric form. Over here we have 3 of the basic types. The cube, octahedron, and pyritohedron. You can combine 2 forms and you get another form. This is actually a regular icosahedron or a 20-sided die. I don't know all the names for all the different combinations of this. They might just be referred to by their individual names just combined together, but you can get a lot of varieties, and this is only just from the 3 that are present here. So this is just a little example of how you can get so many different shapes from the repetition of a simple unit cell. Calcite, a very common mineral, has over 800 crystal forms. I don't have a fancy display for gems, but I do have some real-life gems. When I was in school for geology, my mom got me a set of semi-precious stones that were cut, and I organized them and put them in this little case. I'm not a huge fan of gems. I prefer the natural beauty of uncut crystals. But to answer what a gem is, it's just a crystal with the specific desirable property that it's pretty. Usually they are cut or polished to make them look better. In general, they are just cut crystals. There is also the term gemstone. Lapis lazuli is considered a gemstone, but it's just a rock that is pretty. So let's go back and talk about some of the specifics of the definitions for rock and mineral. This phrase, a naturally occurring, needs some explanation. Like I showed earlier, that bismuth crystal is not natural, so it's not a mineral. But for rock, sometimes this does include organic materials. The bones in our body are mostly calcium phosphate, and there is a calcium phosphate mineral, apatite, that has the same internal structure as our bones. But since it was grown as part of a biologic process, it's not considered a mineral. This is complicated by things like coral. The little organisms make their support structure out of aragonite, a calcium carbonate. Again, it's organic, so technically it's not a mineral. Except when the coral dies, and then it can be buried or broken off and becomes part of sediment, it can eventually become part of a rock. A large part of limestone is the skeletal structure of old marine organisms, and then it's considered a mineral. And I will say that different geologists have different opinions on where to make this distinction at. So we've covered mineral, but what about mineraloid? In short, it's a bunch of stuff that doesn't meet the criteria for a mineral, but we count it anyway. These are usually naturally forming minerals that do not have a repeating structure or a chemical composition that's not quite definite enough to be considered a mineral. Coal is just organic matter, no crystal structure or defined composition. Volcanic glasses, like obsidian, is a bunch of atoms just frozen in time. It cooled down too fast, and they did not have time to form minerals or crystals. Some things we don't have in the game: opal is a bunch of hydrated silica spheres, it's a mineraloid, and amber is an organic material that doesn't have any of the criteria. But since they show up in rock or as part of a rock, they usually just get grandfathered in. It's easier to just say mineraloid instead of having all these caveats to say, well, except obsidian, except amber, except coal, like all this stuff. There are many mineraloids that I have not mentioned here too. To wrap things up, all rocks are made of minerals. It can be a bunch of the same mineral, like the sandstone here could just be a bunch of little pieces of quartz, or it can have many minerals, like this granite. And minerals, like this calcite, are natural solids made of atoms in repeating patterns of unit cells. You could have a rock with a single crystal, and so it's a mineral and a rock. This is a single crystal of dolomite that I found in Australia. It was loose in the ground, and there is nothing wrong with me calling it a rock. Let's go back and look at those rocks from the opening. The first ones are pretty self-explanatory. These are just some garden rocks. This paving stone is an actual real stone, and this brick is man-made. This is a piece of pegmatite, a rock with big crystals. This is the mineral calcite in a rock. This is the mineral graphite. It could also be called a rock. Rocks. This is the mineral hematite, but I found it as a rock in a stream. The concrete here is man-made, so not a rock, but the aggregate in it are natural rocks. This is some waste glass from a bottle manufacturer. This is a piece of schist, a metamorphic rock. This is an example of a monomineralic polycrystalline rock. It only contains one mineral, but several crystals of that mineral. This is a copper sulfate crystal I grew, so it's a crystal, but not a mineral. For some reason, countertops are only sold as granite or quartzite, even though most of them aren't either of those, and a lot of them aren't even natural stone, but the ones here were actually real rocks. And this is part of the Grand Canyon. There is a world download available if you want to go through this world yourself. It works in 1.20.6, and there are a few settings you should use to make sure the effects behave in the right way. Minecraft needs 6 gigs of RAM allocated to it. I am using the NVIDIA mod. I use 128 chunks and 32 chunks for render distance. My entity distance is set to 300%. And with that, we have come to the end of the episode. I had a real good time putting this together. It was definitely my most complex world with all of the scaled effects in the little room over there. I'm excited to get this out and focus on the next episode, the 1.21 color world. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This is a variety of a trapezohedron, specifically a deltoidal icosatetrahedron, specifically a deltoidal icosatetrahedron. A deltoidal icosatetrahedron. Nice.